Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Jebeh Edmonds, and today's guest brings soul, scholarship, and storytelling like no other. Amani Roberts is an internationally renowned DJ, speaker, author, and professor with a master's degree from Berklee College of Music, collaborations with brands like Marriott and Forbes, and a deep respect for Black musical history. He's the author of the upcoming book, The Quiet Storm, a historical and cultural analysis of the power, passion, and pain of R&B groups, a sweeping 500-page journey through the rise, influence, and decline of over 60 iconic Black R&B groups from the 1950s to the 2000s. Amani, welcome to the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast.
Love it. Thanks for that introduction, Jebba. I'm happy to be here. Can't wait to talk to you.
Oh, I can't wait to talk to you too, my dear. I mean, what inspired you to get into writing The Quiet Storm? Like, was there a moment when you realized that Black R&B history needed to be preserved?
Well, I think, my research took me there, and I was researching for my thesis in grad school. And as a DJ, I'd always loved playing all types of music, but I have a sweet spot for R&B music. I grew up with it. It's kind of like the soundtrack to my life. And then I
Mm.
realized that there weren't really a lot of books chronicling specifically like groups. And so I was like, okay, well, that's a space, an opportunity. And then I did the research and I saw there's a lot more to the story than you might imagine. And so I just decided to write it, and it ended up being like a love letter for me to like R&B music.
Yeah. And did that just bring you back, like learning the backstories of some of these groups behind the scenes?
Oh, yes, the backstories, how they got formed, what they did to become successful, maybe how they stayed successful, and then what caused them to maybe decline, break up, not do any more music. Like it was a whole lot of information that I uncovered and discovered.
Oh, yeah, and I can't wait to dive a little bit more into it too, because when we talk about R&B and Black culture specifically, they are the soundtrack, like you said, Amani, of our lives. You can put on one song, even for example, like the staple singers, like I'll take you there. Like
Mhm.
there's just those type of groups where you can pinpoint like where you were in your life's journey and how that song still resonates and makes you feel. And I feel like too with R&B groups, they were the how you say pioneers for social change and social movement with music and voice to the masses. So in your research, what era, since you have that spanning from the 50s to the 2000s, was the most pivotal that you, in your opinion, was that movement for social change? What era?
Right. For social change, absolutely in the 60s, there are two kind of specific groups I love to highlight, like the Impressions. They kind of had two main soundtracks for the times, whether it be Keep on Pushing in 1964, also People Get Ready in 1964. That was a big one. Then Sly and the Family Stone, Everyday People in like 69, which is when, a lot of things were kind of coming to a head. Those are probably two of the groups. So I think absolutely in the 60s, and then it kind of spilled over into the early 70s also. But that was for
Yeah.
social change, that was when they were at their apex.
Awesome, awesome. And were you able to interview some of these, R&B group members?
Not yet. So it's,
Yeah.
the goal is to maybe get the book in their hands. They can see how
Yeah.
legitimate it is. It is a USA Today
Mhm.
bestseller. And
Yes,
we launched
congrats.
it in February. So get it in their hands. They can read it. And that hopefully I'll work on using that to open up more doors to interview. And then maybe we have like a part two, or we have like a second, third, or fourth edition with interviews. But I had to get the book done first to kind of put the
Oh,
research
yeah.
out there and
Oh,
everything. And
yeah.
now maybe we can, attract them like honey, bees
Yeah,
to
I
honey.
love that. Yes, it leads so much. And even like you created that blueprint with your book, to have those conversations and, having people reading and going, "Oh yeah, I remember this group. I wonder what happened." Because a lot
Mhm.
of us, in our culture, life is going, you kind of go, "Man," when you hear it on the radio or you now even in the grocery store, you're like,
Right.
"Dang, I went to this
Yeah,
this group
yeah.
of people," it
Mo
does.
Most people, when I tell them about the book and the topic, they're like, "I never thought about it, but you're right. Where did they go?" Like, it's, like, kinda
Yeah.
hidden. The fact that there's the so, first of all, like, I always like to say, R&B music is not dead at all. what I
Mhm.
really focus on is that just the disappearance of R&B groups, and that's a specific niche, a specific subject. And when I bring it up to people, like they're like, you know what, you're right. We have our legacy groups that are still around
Yes.
performing, whether it
Mhm,
be like
mhm.
New Edition,
Yeah.
whether it be like Jagged Edge. Even you go back, the
Yes.
Commodore still has a band.
Yes,
They have
yeah.
groups out
Kool and the
there. Cool
Gang,
and the
yeah.
Gang, they're still out there performing. The Isley Brothers, who are one of my
Isley
favorites,
Brothers.
they're still
Yeah.
performing, but when you look at to see who's going to be next in terms of the group concept, there's not a lot of
Mhm.
people there currently.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, you know, you mentioned a bunch of book groups, but how were you able to even narrow down who you wanted to include in this book? Come on now.
So
Yeah.
we developed we'll call it an algorithm where we factored in
Mhm.
four things:
Okay.
Grammy nominations and wins, Billboard Hot 100 hits, record sales, and then notable performances. And so you add that up as part of the pie. Now, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we gave more weight to notable performances because it was not very common for you to see a R&B group, a Black R&B group on like The Tonight Show, at the Kennedy Center for Kennedy Center honors. Like that wasn't very common. It was very rare. So as we got to be more mature in terms of the 70s, 80s, 90s, that got to be more commonplace. But back in the day, it was not. So I gave that more power, more
Yeah.
substantial numbers in the algorithm. And then you look at
Yeah.
like, it's an imperfect science, but you combine Grammy nominations and wins, record sales, and Billboard Hot 100 hits, which is not the R&B charts. This is the regular charts with all the genres. And what you'll find is that R&B groups dominated the main charts from the 50s, really the 60s, all the way to the mid 2000s. And the fall off is very noticeable. And you're just like, I wonder what happened.
Yeah, and I like how your book will talk more about what happened because each group is different. They each have their own story and legacy. And I like how you also talked about those earlier groups, there was no access for them to be on a global stage. So you had to have some flexibility and to see who could get into your algorithm that you created. Oh, that is so fascinating. Let's learn more about you, Amani, in the back end, this internationally known DJ, you know, what gave you the foundation, the adults in your lives that made you love, R&B on the world stage? Like, how did Amani come to be? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I credit my father with exposed me to music. I used to play soccer, pretty high level soccer as a kid growing up. So we had to do a lot of road trips to different games, different parts of the East Coast. So I would be in the car listening to the radio, music. And so he's the one that got me started and really kind of helped really get me immersed into music because it wasn't just R&B, it was all genres. And then I just kind of
Mm.
took affinity to R&B. And then as you get older, you're like in junior high, high school, and you're trying to court the ladies or whatever. So you make your mixtapes, you play the dedications, the songs, because I love a good slow jam. I love a good ballad.
Oh,
And
yes. Yeah.
so that just kind of helped it continue to grow. And then as an adult, I think I saw DJ Bismarcky perform, and he was amazing. So I wanted to be a DJ, but I did not think it was a legitimate career at first. And I was wrong, but it took me about 12, 13 years to get the courage to go for it. But then I went for it and just been building my business and my skill set ever since.
That's amazing, Amani. Yeah. And it just, takes that one person in that spark to see that representation of, fulfilling that dream of being, an artist and a DJ. And I got to credit to those dads, my dad too, may he
Yeah.
rest, but he brought all kinds of records home, like
Yes.
Crystal Gale and
Oh,
Kenny Rogers and,
okay.
our little African immigrant family, he had us exposed to all kinds of music, the Staple Singers and Earth, Wind and Fire. So yeah, that's just amazing, amazing. So we talked about the rise of these R&B groups and their power and their purpose. And you did touch a little bit on a lot of their demise and them breaking off. Can you give us an example of like one group from your book that you highlighted about? Where do they end up? What happened?
I think my research told me that the majority of groups broke up for two reasons.
Okay.
One would be like money issues, conflicts with their label, or conflicts with themselves. So it's always around like money, rights. That was one reason. The second
Okay.
reason would be like substance abuse, primarily like, drug abuse, particularly like the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Mhm.
One group that comes to mind that I think could have been even bigger than they were was in the 90s, In Vogue. In Vogue, phenomenal group, amazing
Yes.
singers. Now they were kind of put together, so they didn't grow up together. And I think that led to some conflict, but they were massive. They could all sing, but they never had a number one Billboard hit. They always came in number two. And that was really shocking to me. So, and then they broke up and they had issues. Now you still see some forms of the group out now singing, but the original group, which they were amazing,
Yes.
just couldn't really get the level where I feel they could have been. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of that was like internal conflict. And so that was one group that always comes to mind when I'm like, oh, they had so much potential that they didn't reach. Um,
Yes.
I mean, there are others out there that could have been bigger, Cameo in the 80s, they did very well, but I think they could have
Yes.
been bigger. It's almost like if they came out now, they might be even bigger because
Oh, yes.
you look at like a
Yes.
Bruno Mars, he's kind of capitalizing or taking the blueprint that they laid out with funk and kind of how they mix genres and stuff and taking it to another level. So they're another one that comes to mind just for maybe just probably a little bit too early for their times. So those are
Yes.
two. Those are
Yes.
two that kind of come to mind.
Oh, yeah, especially with the leather pants, those red leather pants and Word Up. Oh, yeah, it
There you
just
go.
what they yeah, where they could have been. Wow, and, you're right too with those 2 factors of industry. A lot of, like you said, we weren't in, just because of circumstances, with education, financial literacy, it wasn't, taught, especially to our
Yes.
groups of people. And so when you get quick money and you've got
Mm,
all these yes people and, oh, I'm an expert in accounting and I'll help you get to this level. A lot of people, in groups like that weren't as educated to know or to follow the money. And like you said,
yeah.
industry taking advantage, of these young people, and like you said, what might have been if they would have sustained and then, of course, interpersonal issues with not knowing you from Adam and then
Mhm.
being into the group,
Yeah.
forcibly like, oh, you guys sing harmonies. This is where you're going to be. There's
Yeah.
going to be those interpersonal,
The
bumps. Yeah.
the one thing that I want to kind of continue what you said is like education. So as a music business professor, I'm particularly passionate about teaching people the business of music. And I have a
Yeah.
special love for teaching people of color the business of music because many times they don't have the resources. They haven't been able to see the example set by maybe some of their peers who came from more privileged backgrounds. And
Mm-hmm.
so I love to share with them just different things about the business of music so that they can, create a legacy. And really a lot of it is just basics, making sure you do your best to control as much of your IP as possible. Know your
Yes.
rights. So when you're
Yeah.
signing away your publishing or your master recording side, you at least you know what you're doing and you're not caught by surprise where 3 or 4 or 5 years later, you're like, well, hold on, why don't I have that? Why don't I have access? Why can't I do this? Just knowledge. And I think, when we look at musicians in general, like a Prince was probably way far ahead of his time in terms of owning the
Yes.
IP and just doing that. Even before Prince, Barry White was also very influential because he
Mm-hmm.
was like he knew the game, because it's kind of a game, it's kind of not. And
Mm-hmm.
and so when you come to education, a lot of these groups that are in the book could have been even more successful and had longer tenures if they had just known and understood the business of music. And so that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about teaching it to the current era of musicians.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because you're right. It is a business. And if
Mhm.
you don't have the wherewithal, the resources, and the good people around you to make sure they want to see you succeed. That also can bring
Yeah.
to your downfall.
Mhm.
Wow. So let's talk too about, mentioning the substance abuse side as well of the people around you, the yes people, the oh, I can get that access for you. Is there a group too that you can also name off the top of your head that had that demise into that? I know it's probably
Yeah.
too many to mention
Yeah.
since you had a
Yeah. Hurts
big
my heart. Well, we go back to the
yes,
60s, Frankie Lyman and the
yes,
Teenagers. And Frankie Lyman,
yes.
he died of a drug overdose. I'm pretty sure you have to fact check. I'm pretty sure that's
Mhm.
that's how he passed away. Young.
Oh,
Like he was a
very
kid,
young.
but they took the world
Yes.
by storm. They were big. A lot
Mm,
of times we don't realize, like, a lot of times we see these groups and these current artists and they kind of blow up really quickly, go viral. Like Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers were massive for a very fast time. It's almost like I forget the mythology. It's like whatever they burned too bright. They kind of got too close to the sun. I forget
Oh,
the
yeah,
name of the
Icarus? Was that
Icarus. Yeah,
Icarus?
a little bit
Yeah.
Icarus. They got too close to the sun because they just burned too bright too fast. And even with the substance abuse, that's why that group demised. But then also they even had racial issues where there was one show they were on, which I reference in the book, and they had instructed the crowd to not clap and not dance when they were there because it was pretty much all white crowd, but they ended up dancing. And then another show, he ended up dancing with the white woman, which nowadays doesn't mean
Oh,
anything.
yeah.
But back in the day,
Yes.
it was
Mm,
so bad that
mm.
TV stations, like the advertisers, pulled out. They shut down that TV show like a week later, and so that's one example. They were just like a imperfect storm because
Yes.
they were so big, so fast, and so young, and then they had drug abuse and just so much unrealized potential. And so when you think of a group
Yes.
in terms of substance abuse, they're the first one that comes to mind. Frankie Lyman and the
Mhm.
Teenagers.
And did they sing "Why Do Fools Fall in Love"?
Yes,
Was that the
yes,
song?
yes,
Yes, yes,
yes.
for a younger audience,
Yeah.
and even there's, like, clips, you can find it even, like, on TikTok of him, Frankie Lyman singing, and all these white girls were, like, not clapping because they
Yeah.
didn't realize that he was black,
Well, at
you know?
maybe they didn't
Was it
realize
somebody else?
he was black,
Yeah.
or I've seen similar clips where they were instructed to not show any love or
Mhm.
emotion,
Oh,
and s
oh.
and so eventually they did, though. They kinda couldn't resist.
Yeah.
So that
So
I
that
think
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, don't clap, don't, like,
Because they
praise him for
no,
singing.
yeah,
That
because
makes sense.
but they couldn't
Yeah.
resist. Eventually, they couldn't resist.
Yes. Oh my goodness. This is so good. You've got all the tea. Wow. So, okay, we talked about the industry and the label and understanding, what you're signing on the dotted line, especially protecting your IP and your publishing rights. And we've talked about, just the movement of Black culture in Black R&B groups. So, what cultural impacts of that stand out to you, mostly today, of what they have brought to us?
Well, when you look at, like, let's look at it a couple ways. Like, you look at the success of K-pop groups. Now,
Yes.
K-pop groups, they are following the exact blueprint from R&B groups. Two groups specifically come to mind. So you have the famous like K-pop female groups like Blackpink, and they're following the TLC blueprint. A lot of what they
Oh,
do, they kind of follow that along. They've kind of imitated, but they're successful as a group in this era, so we need to learn from them. And then you look at like back when BTS was big, their videos, New Edition, that's kind of who they followed or whatever.
yes.
And so whereas they use some of the R&B groups as their kind of blueprint to get to success, but now they're on a different level where when I say we, I'm talking about R&B groups, need to look at what they're doing and follow their blueprint because they're proving that the group concept still works in the current digital era that we're in. So how can we learn
Yeah.
from them? Um,
Yeah. And yeah, that's so true. And even like the choreography, what you
oh
said,
yeah,
BTS, so like it does give
oh
new
yeah,
edition vibes.
oh absolutely,
Yes.
yes. Let's look at If It Is in Love, and then look at maybe
Yes.
BTS's video, and
Yeah.
you're like, that looks quite familiar. So yes,
Yeah, and even, like, I was watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and the K-pop Demon Hunters, even how they would do their range and their riffs, I'm like,
oh
"It
yeah,
feels like deja vu,"
oh
and then
yeah.
that you put on there, yeah.
A lot of the main pop hits of
Mhm.
today really have like R&B foundations in terms of the chords they use, in terms of how they structure the songs. Now the songs are a little bit shorter nowadays than they were back in the day, but how they do
Mhm.
that, how they talk within the music too, like it's emulating and following a lot of the best practices of R&B music, R&B groups. And then when they start to
Yeah.
sing on tour and they're on stage, you absolutely will see it.
Wow, that is amazing. Okay. Wow. This is so, so interesting, especially like you said, that cultural impact is not just the United States, it's worldwide
Yes.
of all of these other influences, like you said, emulating and, flattery of
Yeah.
saying,
I
look,
mean,
it's what we did. We're taking that blueprint and bringing it.
you
Yeah.
even look at a group here. So let's look at like look at two groups. So you look at like Frankie Beverly and Maze. And I remember
Hmm.
I heard an interview recently with Donnie Simpson from Video Soul, and
Yeah,
he
yeah.
used to be DJing when I grew up at like 93.9 WKWS and
Yeah.
95.5 WPGC in DC. And
Yes,
he was
DC.
saying how big culturally Frankie Beverly and Maze were, but in Europe. So they went to London to perform, and you think that London, the Beatles is like all everything London. And I have to look at the venue. There's a special venue in London where the Beatles had sold out like 13 days in a row.
Yeah.
It was a record. But Frankie Beverly and Maze were so big in Europe that they sold this venue out for like 17 days in a row. So they were bigger in terms of selling out this venue than the Beatles were. That just shows you the
See?
culture impact. And Frankie Beverly and Maze, they were big here in the US, but they weren't like massive like that. Like they still, maybe now because he passed away a little over a year ago, they might have
Hmm,
a platinum
hmm.
record, but they never really had a platinum record. They had a bunch of gold records. But
Interesting.
overseas, they were massive. So that just continues to show you the culture impact around the world, not just domestically here in the United States.
Yes. Oh, that's a great example. So here's my other question for you, since we're talking about artists and groups. If you could create a dream panel of three R&B groups, any era, to have a conversation about their impact, who would you pick?
Number one, the Isley Brothers.
Yes.
Number two, New Edition.
Yeah.
And then we need some females influence in the group. So
Mhm.
I would say, whoo, uh, I would probably say like I'm partial like SWV,
Yes.
but maybe
Me
like
too.
or Destiny's Child, one of those two. So
Okay.
you get like because the Isley Brothers are a special, special group. They're the only group in history to have Billboard Hot 100 hits in 6 straight decades. Only group in
Wow.
history from the 50s all the way to the 2000s. So you have to have them there. They're legends.
Of course.
Then you have
Yes.
New Edition. Like they've had hits between their individual members in the group 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. Like they're there.
Yes.
And
They're
then,
there.
Destiny's Child, they're legendary because they weren't first Destiny's Child. They were a different name, Girls Time. They had a bunch of different
Yes.
names. They came in second place on Star Search to this group called the Skeleton Crew. Now, have you ever heard of the Skeleton Crew? No, but you heard of
Oh,
Destiny's Child. And so I
yeah.
just think that they kind of really, really open it up to not only singing, but you do your sponsorships, you have your branding, you're in like movies. Now,
Mm.
groups were in movies before, but they really took it to like the next level, which people are not emulating today. So that's why I have it in there.
Yes.
But I just love SWV, so I want them on there
Yeah.
too.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll give you that 4th group. Yeah, we'll have that. We'll have that bonus 4th, because yes,
Yes.
SWV was also, oh, they were the group, yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So, what do you hope our readers would feel after they finish The Quiet Storm?
Just a sense of like nostalgia, love, like pride, and then curiosity. Curiosity to like be like, let me go and listen to some of these groups I might have forgotten about. Let me go and see what happened to this specific, group or artist or whatever, and just explore. And then just share, talk about it. Make sure it's top of mind and people are still talking about it because any music we listen to now has a lot of foundations in R&B, and so we're not dead. R&B groups are not dead. R&B is not dead, but we still want it to be talked about like it was in its heyday in like the mid '90s. In terms of groups,
Yes.
the head '90s. So just a sense of curiosity, a sense of pride that inspires you to share. That's what I hope people will feel.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And yeah, especially those mid 90s and hearing songs with those beats and you're just for now and you're like, "Oh,
Mm,
man, that's Drew Hill. Like, come
yeah,
on now."
yeah.
Like
There you go.
I'm
Yeah,
dating
Baltimore,
myself, but it's
Maryland.
like
Baltimore, Maryland, still in
Baltimore,
them.
yes, in the house. Yeah. So those are the things where they set the blueprint. But like you said, they're carrying that torch for us to come back to them and get that nostalgia, that feel, and the curiosity. I love how you said that of, I wonder what happened to them and what was, their triumph, especially with the Isley Brothers and how they sustained over
Mhm.
6 decades.
Yeah.
The only group. I didn't know that. See, you learn
Plus,
something new
plus the
every
Isley
day.
Brothers are one of the most heavily
Yes.
sampled groups for hip hop in history. So hip hop artists are taking the sound of back in the day and bringing it to the current stage through sampling. Isley Brothers are
Yeah.
an example of that too.
Oh, yeah, because you knew they heard it from their fathers,
Yes.
listening, growing up in the big stereo and the big,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
so you know it came from somewhere, yes. So where can listeners purchase The Quiet Storm and follow your upcoming book events, learn more about you, Mr. Roberts?
So I would recommend they go to amaniexperience.com/book. You can find links there. Of course, you can buy it on all your sources like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc. I think there's an option on the website. If you want a signed copy, you can buy it there and I can mail it to you. And then I always love to share this option for people who are listening who are true musicians or looking to maybe learn more about the music industry or monetize their music. I have this number where you can sign up for and get text message updates about the music industry. So all you do is text news to 301-638-8749 and that will get you a list. Now there's like a $5 fee per month, but that's pretty cheap. That's the price of a Starbucks. So I always love to give that as an option if people really want to become more immersed.
Yes, yes. And of course, give you the credit where credit is due and pay you for your time. Because
Mhm.
yes, in the business, it is. Our time is currency. And
Yes.
and that's exactly what I enjoy having you on the show and sharing your work with my
Thank you.
audience as
Yeah.
well. Oh, Amani, thank you for walking us through this rich, rhythmic, powerful history. The Quiet Storm is just not a book, it's an archive, just a treasure trove of learning about our history and our culture. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And as always, thank you, listeners and viewers on Mrs. Edmonds' Cultural Corner. And keep sharing and striving and staying culturally curious. Until next time, bye bye.